It is a President's Day episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Jaren Jackson Jr., Zach Edey, Jaylen Wells, all shining brightly on the All-Star Weekend stage. I'm going to talk about that, plus some overall takeaways from what was probably one of the worst All-Star weekends in the history of the National Basketball Association. And it wasn't the players' fault this time. Stick around. It's going to be a fun one. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Monday episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode. No DeMichael Cole, traveling back from the Bay Area. He was there covering all of NBA All-Star Weekend because Memphis had a pretty strong display there at the event. We'll talk about that throughout this episode, but we're going to give him a day or two to catch his breath. I'm Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode, and I hope that you enjoy the next 30-ish minutes of the Grizzlies ride that we are about to embark on together. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Once again, thank you to FanDuel. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. If you can get a podcast, you can find it anywhere you get those over through the Locked On Podcast Network, as we are proud members of that network here on Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you are also subscribing to our free daily newsletter, LockedOnDaily.com. Go to LockedOnDaily.com. Go and check that out right now. Subscribe to the Locked On Grizzlies free daily newsletter. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Very glad to have you with us each and every time a newsletter drops and each and every time that an episode drops. Obviously, this episode is going to be All-Star centered. We are still in the thick of the All-Star break. Memphis doesn't play until later this week. So the next couple of episodes, we're going to focus more on just kind of general topics. And of course, today, we can concentrate on the All-Star weekend and the main event, which was All-Star Sunday, and the way that the league tried to mix things up. Now, I'll give overall thoughts on the weekend that was here in a bit, but I want to lead off this episode of the show. This is Locked On Grizzlies, after all, and I want to give flowers to one Jaren Jackson Jr., who you cannot ask for a better representative of the Memphis Grizzlies throughout the festivities than Jaren Jackson Jr. And I want to take you back, dear listener, dear viewer, to 2 years ago when it was Jaren Jackson Jr.'s first All-Star game appearance, and he did so alongside Joe Morant. And this is not going to be a Joe bashing session, like I know some of you in the comments anticipate from me, thinking that I'm too hard on Joe. That is not how I operate. I think Joe Morant is the best player in Memphis Grizzlies history right now, in terms of talent, combining that with accolades. Obviously more winning to do, but Ja's had a pretty phenomenal career. And Ja was at his apex a couple of years ago around this time. Pop-up Nike shoe store for the Ja 1. Very much looking like the face of the future of American basketball. And then, of course, what happened. Suspensions and injuries. Things got derailed. Fast forward 2 years to the here and now, and Jaren Jackson Jr. is back at All-Star Weekend, this time by himself. And Jaren displays love for the city of Memphis, focus on the goals of the Grizzlies. He, of course, has so many other things that he has his fingers and hands in terms of videography. Drew Hill of the Daily Memphian did a great feature on that over the last couple of weeks. In terms of his work with women's sports, he obviously was a vice president, is a vice president in the Players Association. He does so much beyond the game of basketball, and yet his focus, his energy, especially this time of year, and he said it numerous times over the course of the weekend, comes back to the Memphis Grizzlies, comes back to basketball. Numbers came out over the last few days regarding valuations of NBA franchises, and surprise, surprise, insert sarcasm font, the Memphis Grizzlies are the least valuable NBA franchise in the entire association. 30th out of 30 at a cool $3.2 billion. It's a lot of money still, right? I don't think Robert Parra is really fretting his $300-some million investment that he made years ago, and connecting that to how much the value has gone up just in the several years that Para has owned the team. But the bigger concern with that energy is the reality that this market in Memphis is never going to attract big name free agents. It's just not going to happen. And it's also not necessarily going to attract established stars via trade. We saw that over this trade deadline and the last couple of trade deadlines. Memphis making massive offers for Kevin Durant and KD saying, no, thank you. Jimmy Butler, outwardly, at least through Chris Haynes and other sources, saying, I'll go to any team in the NBA but Memphis. Sure, some of that has to do with contract extensions. Some of that has financial ramifications. But the reality is that Memphis is not going to be a prime destination for players like that. The way that you acquire players like that, if you are the Memphis Grizzlies, is via the NBA draft. That's how it has to be done for this particular market. Every once in a while, the trade works out. But go back to the Pau Gasol trade that brought Marc Gasol to Memphis. That was not anticipated. That was a happy accident, a pleasant surprise. Zach Randolph was damaged goods when he came to Memphis. Part of the Jailblazers. He redeemed himself. Nobody questioned Zach's ability to play ball. They questioned whether or not Zach was going to be able to keep himself together to get to that place. And of course, the rest is history with Zebo. Tony Allen came in from the Boston Celtics, going to get his number retired next month. I'm excited to be there in person for it. But nobody outside of Memphis would claim that that is a significant signing. When your team's biggest free agent signing in the history of the organization is Chandler Parsons, we all know how that turned out. It further serves the point that the way that this team needs to be built is through the draft. And the longest tenured Memphis Grizzly now is Jaren Jackson Jr., the 4th overall pick in the 2018 NBA draft. He is an all-star. He is a legitimate all-NBA player this season. If he does not get at least third-team all-NBA, something is wrong with the system. I refuse to believe that there are 14 players better than Jaren Jackson Jr. in the National Basketball Association this year when you combine productivity with availability. You can't convince me otherwise. And he is Memphis through and through because that is all he's known. And if you are from Memphis or the regional area, you used to live in Memphis like me, you know this to be true. If you love Memphis, Memphis will love you back. And that is exactly what Jaren Jackson Jr. is for the Memphis Grizzlies. He loves Memphis and the community loves him back. He commits to helping the fan base and helping build the organization, and the city and those that support it appreciate him for it. Memphis is a basketball town. They love the game of basketball. Memphis Tigers, first and foremost, before the Grizzlies arrived, through the grit and grind era, and now with this new heightened athleticism, next gen, Ja Morant era, whatever you want to call it. I think Memphis, more than ever before, is close to being a Grizzlies town. The reality of the situation is that if you are going to maintain that, it is through the NBA draft. It is through acquiring stars and quality players in that way. Because if all you know is Memphis, and you come into the city and you see what it can do for you, you see how they embrace you, you see how they love this team and love the game of basketball, you will realize that you can go live on the coast. You can go live in Miami. You can go do those things and travel and have multiple houses, considering the money these guys make, the other 6 months of the year if you really want to. But Memphis as a basketball home base, you can do a heck of a lot worse if that is where your focus is. And Jaren Jackson Jr. said over the weekend as much. His focus now is entirely on Memphis and the Grizzlies and basketball. He played well. He gave effort. He tried. Could have played better, but lots of guys could have played better. Jaren represented the city and the organization extremely well, and he deserves all the credit in the world for that. So kudos to you, Jaren. Congratulations on the second All-Star selection. I have a sneaky suspicion more season accolades are heading your way in the next couple of months. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Going to talk about Zach Edey, Jaylen Wells finding a way onto the All-Star Sunday stage thanks to their Rising Stars Challenge performance. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Hungry Root. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, I've had this ongoing problem. I just don't have the time. Work, life, trying to eat healthier. I'm constantly feeling stressed out. I would like to go to the grocery store, but then I'd buy things I don't need and then end up with no time to actually cook. Sticking to health goals is also a struggle, but everything changed when I discovered Hungry Root. Honestly, it's been a game changer. It's the easiest way to eat healthy without all the stress. Hungry Root is like having a personal shopper and a nutritionist all in one. They take care of my grocery shopping, recommending meals and groceries based on my tastes and health goals, from anti-inflammatory to high protein and gluten-free options. The best part? Every meal is ready in 15 minutes or less. It's been a huge time saver, with healthy eating being so much simpler. You're going to love Hungry Root as much as I do. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box and a free item in every box for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA. That's hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA. Do not miss out on Hungry Root. They do great work. So Zach Edey and Jaylen Wells joined Jaren Jackson Jr. on NBA Sunday night, thanks to their winning the NBA's version of the Rising Stars Challenge, the new look version, on Friday night. And I do need to say this. For all the criticism that the All-Star weekend is going to receive, and they're going to receive some criticism from me coming up later in the show, for all of that criticism, I personally enjoyed watching the young players compete, because the key word there is compete, right? One of the struggles that the NBA faces, the greatest struggle you could argue, is getting these players to actually try in these games. And to the credit of the players, they did try more than they have in past years because of the format. And I believe one of the major reasons for that effort comes from the fact that they didn't want to get embarrassed by these younger players. Because guess who played the hardest throughout the course of the weekend? The younger players. And who was the best young team? Team Candace's team on Sunday included Keontae George, Stephon Castle, Dalton Connect of failed Hornets Lakers trade fame, Amen Thompson, Ryan Dunn, Trace Jackson Davis, and of course, Jaylen Wells and Zach Edey, who both started in a game on NBA All-Star Sunday. Now, Draymond Green can be mad all he wants that these young players had the stage of NBA All-Star, which is ironic in and of itself. And we'll talk more about that later on. And Team Candace lost to Team Shaq 42-35. Team Shaq eventually goes on to win the entire thing, right? They win the entire event. But the important thing to point out, beyond the structure and all the issues that All-Star Weekend faced, was that no team combined youth with success the way that the Memphis Grizzlies did at All-Star Sunday in particular. Zach Edey and Jaylen Wells didn't have their best game in the game. 1 for 3 for both of them. Couple of rebounds. No made threes for Jaylen Wells. Other players played better, like Dalton Connect, Amen Thompson. Ryan Dunn even did some nice things. But Wells and Edey being on the floor against the likes of Kevin Durant, Jason Tatum, Steph Curry, Dame Lillard, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, Jaylen Brown, to be among those guys in and of itself is valuable experience for a group of guys that doesn't have the experience because they are literally rookies in the case of Wells and Edey in particular. To be on that stage, to have those eyeballs and that attention and all the shining lights, to a lesser extent, the nonsense celebrities, which again, we'll get to, don't worry. In the absence of experience, wherever you can get that type of feeling, it is valuable. And that is exactly what Memphis's youngest players, or not youngest players, least experienced players in Edey and Wells got access to. They were able to be on that stage to go against those guys in an exhibition. I'm not trying to equate it to playoff basketball because it's not. But it still matters because there's going to come a postseason series eventually, right, in the next couple of months. And the Memphis Grizzlies are going to need, whether they're starting or not, Jaylen Wells and Zach Edey. If Wells goes to the bench and Vince Williams Jr. supplants him, we'll talk more about Vince Williams Jr. on tomorrow's show. If that occurs, great. Jaylen Wells is still getting about 20 minutes a game. If Zach Edey goes to the bench and they decide to go with someone like a Brandon Clark or a Santi Aldama, go a little bit smaller, I don't think that's wise, and we'll talk about why tomorrow. But I do believe if that happens, Zach Edey is still getting 20 or so minutes a game off the bench. You need those two to get as many reps as possible in games where either it's meaningful basketball, which obviously regular season play is meaningful, or the lights are bright. The attention is there. And that is 100% true for Memphis from Sunday in particular. Jaren's used to the lights at this point, right? He's never been on the Western Conference final stage or the NBA final stage. That was his second NBA All-Star game. He's a veteran now, right? I mentioned he was drafted in the 2018 NBA draft. We're finishing up year 7 of Jaren Jackson Jr. That's wild to say out loud, but it's true. Edey and Wells need as many opportunities to get in front of those cameras, to get in front of those lights as possible, because they're not going to get many more. They're going to get plenty of competition. The Grizzlies have one of the most challenging schedules coming out of the All-Star break in the NBA. It's in the top 5, I believe. They need reps, and they need to see that they belong. Confidence building is key. The oldest Grizzlies on the team are John Conchar, Luke Kennard, and Brandon Clark at the age of 28. Confidence is key. In the absence of traditional veteran leadership, Marcus Smart is traditional veteran leadership. He's gone now. In the absence of that, obviously this is Ja's team. This is Jaren's team. This is Bane's team. But they're still, Jaren's 25 years old. Ja's 25 years old. Dez is 26. They're entering their primes. Wells and Edey are nowhere near their prime. And they are nowhere near the level of experience that you would want from guys that are going to potentially be starting in a postseason series. So no, playing a first 1 to 40 wins exhibition against guys that are half trying is not the best way to replicate that intensity. But I'm talking about the stage. I'm talking about the moment. Getting that opportunity to be in that place, no matter how Draymond Green thinks, the ridiculousness of those guys being in that position in the first place. They didn't earn all-star selections. That's true. Not disputing that in the least. But they brought energy. They brought intensity. They brought a sense of urgency from those NBA All-Stars that they have not had in a game in a long time. They brought the juice. And that matters, especially for a Grizzlies team that does not have guys outside of the big 3 and a couple others that have been through the wars of the postseason. Think about it from that perspective. G.G. Jackson, Vince Williams Jr., Wells and Edey. That's 4 of your potential 9 or 10-man playoff rotation that have not played meaningful basketball in the postseason. That's a massive concern. And it's not their fault. When you're as young as the Grizzlies are, you need to maximize moments. And that's exactly what Wells and Edey did over the weekend. So congratulations to Wells and Edey for being in that spot, winning that Rising Stars Challenge on Friday, going on to Sunday and giving Team Shaq a run for their money. LeBron James may not have cared about the festivities. Anthony Edwards might have had a groin injury or a cold or a combination of the two. Maybe his groin had a cold. However that works. And again, we'll get to the All-Star issues here coming up. But I want to make sure that Jaylen Wells and Zach Edey know that their weekend was not a waste of time. Not just in terms of enjoying themselves and being part of that moment, but being part of that stage. And the eyeballs that come with playoff basketball will now be less stressful. for those two players in particular, and that's going to pay dividends. As I mentioned before, when we come back, we are going to finish up this episode, some general all-star thoughts closing out the show. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love FanDuel's live betting feature. It keeps every moment of a game exciting. Whether you're backing a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, you never feel like you miss a chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid almost instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Speaking of the National Basketball Association, they made some news over the weekend, and not in the best way. All-Star Saturday night, dominated by the three-time slam dunk champion Mac McClung, phenomenal dunker who has now almost tripled his career NBA earnings in slam dunk contest winnings. That is a true statement that was said out loud because it is accurate. That should be concerning for the NBA. Sunday, you have an event where young players participate, and clearly that got folks like Draymond Green in their feelings, as I mentioned earlier, stating that they didn't think those young players, who, again, are the ones that played the hardest, the most consistently, those guys shouldn't have been on that stage. And maybe Draymond has a point, but Charles Barkley had a better point in response to retort Draymond Green. The reason that the All-Star game is in the state it's in, and I would argue it's worse than the Pro Bowl now of the NFL, because at least the Pro Bowl knows who they are. They understand that football is a violent game. They know that if you follow the game of football, you're more likely to get hurt if you're not trying than if you are. So that game being an actual exhibition football game with pads and helmets and that doesn't make sense. So they've gone to an obstacle course, tug of war, flag football. They're having fun with it. And it's at the end of their season. So at the end of the day, who cares, right? They're leaning into that. This is an NBA exhibition in the middle of their season that the players, for the most part, do not care. Now, again, to their credit, they tried more this year. In my opinion, in part because those young players were there and they didn't want to get embarrassed by them. But Charles Barkley made the point that it was this generation of players, LeBron James's generation, the last 20 years or so, that have ruined the NBA All-Star game. It didn't used to be this way. And I'm not waxing nostalgic as some old guy, get off my lawn, thinking that the All-Star game used to be better. I know that it used to be better because they used to actually compete in the All-Star game for consistent periods of time. That's not the case anymore. It just isn't. Last night was better. It was. I watched it. It was better. The basketball was better. But that's the NBA's problem, is they don't trust their product. They don't trust their employees. That's what these players are, the employees of the NBA. They don't trust them to put the best foot forward of the product. So what do? They go out and they have send-offs for Inside the NBA on TNT, keywords being on TNT because Inside the NBA is living on beyond this season, in the middle of the championship game. There were essentially 5 All-Star breaks, or 5 halftimes. There were 5 halftimes. Who the hell is Mr. Beast? Feel free to make fun of me in the comments about how old I am, that I don't know who Mr. Beast is. Ask your students, Joe. Ask your children, Joe. They probably know who Mr. Beast is. This is a game that's on cable television. Even if you wanted to subscribe to the idea that young people are consuming media in different ways, there's all sorts of data that backs that up. Does the NBA have a ratings problem? Yes. Is it as big as other people make it out to be? No. Because I know that young people watch the game and consume the NBA in a different way, even different than the NFL. But this is a game that is broadcast on TNT. This isn't on YouTube. You're not streaming and clicking and clipping. I'm trying to watch basketball. You have the best athletes on the planet who, to their credit, did try harder on Sunday night. They did. And I'm watching Mr. Beast and Kevin Hart completely hijack the event. The basketball was not the problem on Sunday night. It was everything that surrounded the basketball. The Mr. Beast shootout, whatever that was. Kevin Hart completely hijacking the entire affair. That is not why people should be turning into the NBA. And if you think you need all that smoke and mirrors and clown show to accentuate what's supposed to be best about your league, then you've lost the plot. You've lost the plot. Make it about the basketball. You have so much young talent. You have older talent getting towards the twilight of their careers that competed because they didn't want to get embarrassed. For whatever reason you want to come up with, the games were fine until the very end after a 15-minute break to send off Gone Fishing, Shaq and Kenny Smith and Chuck and Ernie Johnson. I love those guys just like everybody else. The show is continuing. It was TNT basically giving a love fest to TNT during their final All-Star broadcast. If this was the last time that Turner ever broadcast an NBA All-Star event, it went out with a thud. It went out with a thud. How do you make it better? Focus on the basketball. The All-Star dunk contest, again, Mac McClung's phenomenal. I'm not saying he's a bad dunker. Gate City, Virginia, stand up. But who outside of hardcore NBA All-Star Saturday night viewership and Gate City, Virginia knows who Mac McClung is? To make a Memphis Grizzlies spin on this, John Morant tweets out, hey, Mac McClung making me think I'll get in on this dunk contest thing. Giannis says if Ja does it, Giannis Antetokounmpo will do it. Great. Zach LaVine, hey, maybe I'll get back in. Those would be actual all-star players participating in the dunk contest. That'd be phenomenal. But again, the players are part of the problem. And nobody wants to say that because they're worried that a player is going to dunk on them on social media or make fun of them. Boo freaking who? Look in the mirror, NBA players. Until last night, you were part of the problem. And then, after the NBA does all of these things to get you to try harder, and you do, to your credit, it was better basketball. But they didn't trust it enough. The product, they're the National Basketball Association. They didn't trust their own product enough. They thought they had to have all these bells and whistles too. So the basketball was fine. It was the presentation and the investment into the basketball. That is why NBA All-Star Weekend was a dud for me. Let me know how you feel about NBA All-Star in the comments. Hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. Let me know what you're thinking. Of course, our YouTube and podcast comments are good as well. When we come back on tomorrow's show, Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to be talking about some two-man data from Cleaning the Glass. Very interesting. Maybe may shape some lineup thoughts going into the post-All-Star slate. We're going to talk about trying to get Ja Morant going, finding his offense, ways to maximize him because they need him. The Memphis Grizzlies do as the schedule tightens and toughens. And we will also be talking about where to find this energy to start a strong second half. All that and more on our Tuesday episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're with us. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing. Wherever you get podcasts, we're proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get podcasts, make Locked On Grizzlies a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. And remember, we have Locked On Daily as well, lockedondaily.com. That's our free daily newsletter. Again, click on the Locked On Grizzlies tab, subscribe, lockedondaily.com. It is our free daily newsletter. Check that out as well. Thank you so much for being with me on this edition of the show. I will catch you here tomorrow. Until then, stay locked in. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, literally anywhere you get podcasts, Locked On Grizzlies has your back. We'll see you tomorrow. See you.